What moment completely shattered you, ruined you, or broke your heart completely? Serious. Wife died from cancer in 2007. She was 50 and we'd been married 29 years. She was the light of my life, and although I function, I will never be the same. This is the only one to get me in this whole thread. This is my worst fear. You find the strength you need when you need it. At least I did. My advice is live your life fully now. Don't put things off. Never know how long the thread of your life is. My grandfather doesn't speak English. He hasn't for any of the 24 years that I've been alive, and I don't speak Portuguese, so I've never had a very close relationship with him. Nevertheless, conversation was not necessary for me to realize what kind of a man he is. This is a guy that ran his own import/export business, loading and unloading trucks until he was about 83. He would wake up at 5 every day, cook breakfast for my grandmother and serve it to her in bed, head to work at 7 a.m. until 5 that night, and then come home and make dinner for her. Rinse. Washington, repeat. He built their house with his own hands, does all upkeep himself, grows crops, spices and some vegetables, and still somehow found the time to raise 10 kids. Long story short, he's a very hard man in my eyes. That is why when I came home from uni last December for my grandmother's funeral, I was blown away. This stoic monolith of a man who had never shown the slightest trace of emotion around me was a wreck, as you'd probably expect him to be. He wasn't wailing or making a scene. He was just sitting there in front of my grandmother's casket at the visitation service, silently weeping for hours. He didn't sleep that night, and when her funeral came, he did the exact same thing. He stood there through the burial weeping, and when the time came for everyone to throw their handful of dirt into the ground, this man fell to his knees and let out the slightest whimper. It was the sound that broke my heart, because even at the faintest volume I heard this man's entire life shatter in that one breath. My grandmother was buried a day after what would have been their 70th wedding anniversary, and this year, not 3 days ago, I had to relive that moment. It was the first Thanksgiving we've ever had without my grandmother, and my grandfather refused to partake. He just sat on my grandmother's bed the entire day silently weeping. It wasn't until I saw this man crack that I realized what it truly meant to love someone with all your heart, and simultaneously what it meant to truly be heartbroken. Edit, a word. My brother was staying with us and had gone upstairs to take a shower. I had a bad feeling after 15 minutes and no water was running. I knocked on the door and didn't get an answer. I ended up pushing the door open and saw him covered in his own blood in the bathtub. It felt like hours for the ambulance to show up, even though I know it could have only been a few minutes. My mom went to the hospital. I had to stay with my year-and-a-half-old nephew. They didn't think it was right to have him see any of it. I ended up cleaning up the blood myself so my mom wouldn't have to. It was 5 years ago and I remember it like it was yesterday. My mother saying it was my fault my father cheated her because I wasn't perfect. I was 12. Damn. I witnessed my 11-year-old cousin's death during a family vacation about 16 years ago. I was really little, so emotions weren't really a thing yet. But two things said in one conversation years later were really difficult to think about. My dad and I were talking about him. My dad told me that he had been teaching my cousin earlier that day how not to be afraid of a baseball flying at his face so that the other kids on his team would stop making fun of him. When we got to talking about the aftermath of my cousin's accident, my dad said something to the effect of, "It was really surreal to realize life had to keep going that day. There was an ambulance in the driveway, people crying, tons of chaos, and none of you, the other 6 cousins, got it. All you guys wanted was some mac and cheese." After what felt like an eternity of waiting, hearing my mom break down and cry while telling me the paramedics couldn't revive my 2.5-year-old brother, I'll always remember that day pretty vividly. I was only 8 and blamed myself. Edit, thanks everyone for your kind words. It was almost 12 years ago that this happened and I no longer blame myself. It has certainly made me cautious about my kid and pools, and when I can afford it I'm going to start her on swimming lessons. Oh man, I'm so sorry, to you and your mom. As a mother myself, that really pulls at the heartstrings there. What happened to him? If you don't mind me asking. Halfway through boot camp they woke me up in the middle of the night to tell me that I had a phone call. This was not common practice. It was my mom, telling me that my dad had just had surgery because of walking pneumonia. My parents had been divorced for years, so this was strange also. When I graduated boot camp, my dad couldn't make it, but he paid for my mom to go. Also strange. When I saw my mom after the ceremony, that's when she told me that he had lung cancer, and it was really bad. I saw him during my boot camp leave, and he looked pretty bad. But his spirits were upbeat. When I went back to A's school, my dad and I became AT&T's best customers. I talked to him every night on the phone for like an hour or more. Like clockwork. I'd head to one of our pay phones with a seat, call him chat, and we'd just chat for hours about this and that, mostly about me telling him about my day. After about 3 months, he wasn't doing so well. Even though I was in the middle of nuclear field school, electronics, they were going to give me a week off so I could go visit him, also highly irregular. This would force them to have to move me to a new class. I had airline tickets all set to leave on Friday afternoon to go home and spend a week with him. On Friday afternoon, as I was finished up a few more classes, my chief and the base chaplain pulled me out of a transistors lab. My dad had died that morning, hours before I could see him again. When the husband of a close friend told me that she died, as well as her unborn baby, in a freak incident a week before giving birth, I felt agony for her, for him, for their baby, for so many for so long. She was there for my baby when she was born, and I was going to be there for her. It's been almost 8 years, but I still wanted to cry. Edit. Thanks for the support. I haven't talked about their deaths in a while, and didn't realize how hard it still is for me to discuss. Here's the freak incident. One of her internal arteries ruptured. Because it was their first pregnancy, they didn't know that her ill feelings were from bleeding internally, and not from going into labor. It was a week before her due date. When she passed out, her husband carried her to their car, called the hospital, they lived close by, and got her into the ER. Unfortunately, she died from internal bleeding and so did their baby. My sweet friend and her baby are buried together in the same casket. The moment I found out my fiancée cheated on me is the moment I knew I'd never love anyone the same way I had once loved her. When I found out that my best friend had committed suicide. I was 15. I had to tell my dad, my mom when she got in from work. I'd known her since kindergarten. Telling them was almost as bad as hearing. I'm 29 now and I still miss her every damn day. My mom died when I was a senior in high school. It all seemed very surreal, and like she had never actually left, since everything of hers was still in the house, where she had left it. At her funeral, after hearing my brother and sister speak, make morbid jokes, as our family tends to do, and just generally do the normal funeral stuff, it finally hit me. It had been several days since she had passed, but it just hit me all at once like a bag of bricks that I would never hear her voice again. She would never be there to nag me when I needed to take out the trash, clean my room, do my homework, or the million other things that she had to constantly remind me to do. That was the moment that I broke down and started sobbing. I hadn't shed a tear up until that point, maybe it was shock, I don't know. In that moment I realized that I now lived in a different world, one where I would have to finish growing up without the aid of my mother. Edit. I apologize that I will not be able to respond to everyone's comments. Thank you all for the kind words, it's good to know that I'm not completely alone here. My college graduation, Bachelor in Architecture. Dad didn't come because he didn't want the hassle of asking for a day off work. Boyfriend out of town because he planned a trip with his friends with no regard for the date. Mom came, but a week before she told me she didn't think I would really graduate. After the ceremony, she suggested celebrating at Subway. Never felt more proud of myself or more alone than that day. Selling my childhood house. My whole family died in a car crash a few months before, and selling it finally made me realize I had nothing left of my old life. The situation as a whole gave me PTSD, but I've learned to cope with it. Having to tell my mom that my dad was cheating on her. I'd had suspicions for a while because he had brought this woman over to stay the night in the guest room, went to gaming conferences with her, and we even had neighbors telling us that they had seen him out at dinner with her on multiple occasions. Well, I found the phone bill when it came in and saw hundreds of calls to this woman late at night after my mom had gone to bed and on every holiday. I think my mom was in denial, but I couldn't watch her sit by while he just annihilated everything that marriage stands for. I would often come home from school, I was 16 at the time, and find her crying on the kitchen floor. I think the worst part of it all was that my dad to this day swears up and down that he wasn't seeing this woman, even though he admitted to dating her shortly after the divorce and is now married to her. The part that really breaks my heart is that I'll never be able to forgive him or consider him a father figure in my life. Edit. Major thanks to whomever sent the gold. This was a difficult situation, so I really appreciate it. My ex-wife had cheated on me once, so we went through a year of marriage therapy which amounted to nothing. She still stayed out late, coming home around 4 in the morning or so. We eventually tried a short-term separation in which I spent 2 weeks in this god-awful apartment. I thought I had learned to appreciate her more, but she seemed absolutely delighted by the break from me. After that, we agreed to do a long-term separation. I would stay with my parents, and at the end of the summer, we'd see where we were. So in February of this year, my parents packed all my stuff, and at age 26, I moved back in with them. A few weeks later I get a call, she's pregnant. The father's one of her drinking buddies. I'm not an angry person by any means, but I took King lost it. I was under the impression there was still a chance, and for a few years beforehand we had been trying to have a kid with no success. But, her kid was born just a few days ago, and rather than being depressed or angry, I think it was a good thing because I just didn't want to hold on to that anger. Maybe she deserved it, but the kid didn't. I hope he has a good home. My life's all topsy-turvy now, but I want that kid to grow up well. Edit. There's a good handful of comments that are saying things like, "Hey, the bitch has it coming to her. I've gone through the anger and the depression, and I'm not 100% through it all, but it's really not worth being angry over anymore. I luckily have come out of this with no physical consequences, no alimony, knowledge that I was at least faithful to her, didn't lose any good friends, her parents still like me, etc. So I'm fine with knowing that she's going to live her life and I'm going to live mine. Neither of us want to battle over anything, we just want this done and over with." My middle school girlfriend had moved away, and even though we'd had split up we'd stayed in touch over MSN. She had been diagnosed with cancer and was going in for treatment. This was not her first experience with cancer. She had written a, sort of, just in case, goodbye note. After 6 months of silence from her and I emailed her and received an email from her mother saying she'd not made it. I sat on that for a year, it was so alien. She was so far away, and I'd never see or hear from her again. It took so much out of me to get over her death. A year later she logged into MSN. She explained it had been a joke. I haven't trusted anyone since. In 2010, I lost my mom, my dog, and my cat in the same year. It started with my dog. He had stage 4 cancer and then had a stroke one morning. It was the first time I had to actually be there when someone I cared about died. I held him in my arms as the vet put him down. I felt him go limp and die in my arms. 3 months later, my cat started howling out of nowhere one night. He'd been in perfect health, when suddenly he collapsed. When I took him into the vet the next morning, he was already feeling cold to the touch but still with us. He'd had an aneurysm in his spine and was leaking blood. There was no way to repair it, so I had to once again hold a loved one while they died by my decision. 3 months after that, my mom was hospitalized. She'd been sick for a while, leukemia. They said it was serious, so I flew out from the other side of the country to see her. She was bad off, but healing, and they said she'd be able to go back home in a few days. I laughed with her and told her there were easier ways to trick me into a visit. Just before I was getting ready to fly out again, we got a call in the middle of the night. She'd had a stroke, a really bad one. The docs had her on a ventilator and let us know that there was a very slight chance that they could repair the damage, but she would be a vegetable the rest of her days. Dad and sister already decided, it was left to me to cast the final vote. I had to decide to pull the plug. My decision, once again, led to the death of someone I loved dearly. Once again, I had to hold a loved one while they died in my arms. That moment broke me. I haven't been the same since. It's been 3 years and even writing this is starting to get blurry and I'm choking up. It doesn't get easier, dealing with death and those close to you. It changes you in permanent ways. Like losing an arm or a leg, you have phantom memories triggered by sounds or sights. Sometimes the way someone makes their pasta sauce will bring back a flood of memories. It fundamentally changes you. If you'll indulge the metaphor a little longer, you'll see that like a missing limb, you heal by adaptation. You slowly adjust to the new reality until you barely remember a time when that wasn't the norm. You still remember them and think of them, you simply learn to live with the changes until it no longer feels unnatural. It just takes time to do that. To adjust and adapt. The closer you were to them, the harder and longer a process that becomes. I'm getting there, but it still feels wonky and painful. I'll never be the guy I was before, but I'll be the guy he changed into. Miss you, Mama. Right now my 9-year-old niece is losing her battle to brain cancer. I was there a month and a half ago, went trick-or-treating with her, her brother and my daughter. We knew the news then, but she has deteriorated rapidly. No longer can walk, sleeps a lot and has very few lucid moments. Got a call from my mum to come quickly, so making arrangements to travel there. This is one of the worst tragedies to hit our family, but seeing my brother, who himself is very ill, being shattered by losing his daughter is the most heart-wrenching thing to watch. I honestly think he is not far behind her, he's so ill. I think he is just hanging on for her. Damn. I can't even imagine this. I'm so sorry you and your daughter had to deal with this. My best friend in the army got killed by an IED in Afghanistan about 4 years ago. He had just proposed to his girlfriend over Skype and she had said yes weeks before. Seeing that pain killed me at his funeral. What broke me was me telling her a year later, while she was crying to me, that Shane would have wanted her to move on and not to feel guilty. Basically, I told my best friend's fiancé that it was alright to move on and date again. I still feel conflicted that it's what he would have wanted, but also, I dunno. War sucks. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit X. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.